welcome to the next episode of the Appalachian Podcast. I'm your host, Billy Riddle, and with me for the first time since our show at the Pig River Precision Gun Range, Simon Winch. Simon, welcome back.
That's a pleasure to be here.
It feels good. It feels good to have Simon back in here. And fortunately for everybody listening, because a lot of people ask for it, and a lot of people continue to bother me about it. And in fact, our guest tonight, the first go-round specifically, asked for it. So we're going to be getting a little bit more Simon here. He's going to be taking on a little bit larger of a role, coming in and helping out with some of these shows we do. And in the same breath, the gingerbread man, John Clements, is going to be doing the same. So, you know, we're going to bring them two on as more of a bigger contribution part of the co-hosting. And I think it's a phenomenal idea because both of you are very well traveled. You've got, you know what it is to struggle. You know what it is to have kids. You're very good with anybody and everybody you're around. And the stories are always good. And every time I bring any of y'all around, everybody's like, man, you got to bring John back. You got to bring Simon back. We're going to go up there and hang out with them again. And the statistics don't lie. The shows are always, you know, up in the upper echelon of listens. So, I guess welcome to the team.
I've got to brace myself.
Probationary period.
As a probationary period, I do have to ask: is my I'm going to try and contain my sailor mouth because I believe a few episodes of it slipped out into depravity and debauchery, but passion brings these things forth, right?
I think that's only the case when there's not like any real passion behind it. If you're just cussing every other word just to do it, you know, it kind of gets redundant. But every now and then a good F word, it paints a picture. You know, it can be used as a verb. It can be used as a noun, a pejorative, like the F word.
It's multifaceted.
Exactly. You know, so.
And it sounds better with, dare I say it, my accent.
It does. And that's another big reason, because you and John both sound phenomenal as radio personalities, so to speak. Like your voice just carries very well. When you listen to it, it's soothing. You know, I sound like, you know, I can't even imagine how deep Alabama, Mississippi I sound to people around
a rusty
here.
Anchor chain being drawn over sheet metal.
I am
perhaps
my accent is nails on a chalkboard to somebody from like New Jersey. Like, huh?
And then you throw in Amos.
Exactly. Even more of a bumpkin, I guess, would be the proper terminology.
Oh yeah, who did we get collared by at the Chaos Brewery? The chap down at Duke.
Oh, Freddie Hodges.
Yeah, he goes, man, that's you two. And I said, hey, who are you? Oh, he goes, I know you from the Appalachian podcast. I went, well, I mean, me, yeah, but how do you know him? Because my accent's fairly distinctive, right? And Amos has that same projection.
Well, I think Amos also knows, or should know, Freddie, because both of them, God help them, root for Duke basketball and I guess football now that they're good. You know how finicky Duke fans are, but yeah, so they do have that common bond. And Freddie's been on the show a couple of times.
Is that a bit of cross-border influence there, by any chance?
What do you mean?
North Carolina and Virginia?
Well, when it comes to basketball, it's a North Carolina thing because Durham and Chapel Hill are about 30 minutes apart from each other, and they're two of the best basketball teams in the country year in and year out, typically. Very heated, very big ratings every time. I mean, it's the most watched college basketball game, probably basketball game, NBA included, other than maybe the finals. I mean, families fight over Duke and UNC basketball. I'm sure.
Shocking.
Yeah. So.
Rugby players don't do that, you know.
Who's that?
Rugby players. We don't do that sort of thing.
You know what?
We're very civilized.
Yeah, that's the it's kind of what I get from most of the rugby players I've ever met. They've always been very the guys you'd see in the library first at school, essentially. You know, no nonsense, studying, really
studious.
Yes, nose in the books.
That's it.
Yeah. If you ever catch them drinking a beer, it's usually about 4:00 in the afternoon.
It's normally a shandy, actually.
Yes. Oh my Lord.
And moving on swiftly.
Yes. Well, you might be asking yourself why Simon is on here today, and well, the best reason I can give you is because I want him to be on here. So, but aside from that, we're doing a replay show today. We did a show about 2 or 3 months ago, and I came home after the show, ready to upload it, do all my editing, and put it out the next day. And I looked, and the audio had completely ghosted me. I was looking for it everywhere, hitting undo, going to back channels. I looked for 3 days, and I couldn't. Like, I was sick to my stomach because it's a waste of everybody's time to come in here and do all that kind of stuff and not have it record, not have the ultimate product that you were aiming for. And I take a lot of pride in my product. And I thought we walked out of that night with a great show. I said, this is going to be one of the most listened to shows we got. And
figure it this way: rather than wasted energy, we've now set a game plan in place. We know where we're coming from. Now perhaps we can go to some greater depth.
True.
On the rerun.
True. I think
you suck.
Whether that first show happened or not, I figured we'd be sitting down for this one anyway. Although it didn't, we're still here. And I'm glad we waited a couple of months because I'm the type that if something's fresh in my mind, it'd be real redundant to go over it again the next week. And then, of course, our kid really hasn't made things easy on us and not sleeping very well. So our time is kind of limited. And, we get racetracks here and there. And I was like, all right, I'm just finding a good time. And so, all right, when hay season's coming around, maybe I can slide Simon away from Amos for a few hours on a Tuesday night, and let's make it happen. So
it was a great show.
Yeah, I mean, it was phenomenal.
We found, much to my relief, some very common ground. Because maybe in the past, I'm not going to say it was adversarial, but it was conflicted.
Yes.
So we've certainly found some common ground, which I think is a good thing. And we don't have to agree on everything, but we found some common ground. And I'm cool with that.
Well, and an awful lot of things have happened since last time we had these gentlemen on the show as well. So, it's always good to see how life has kind of unfolded, to maybe see how your perspectives have changed and stuff. And I think this show, much like our State of Appalachia show with Brandon, I think revisiting that one again and maybe seeing how our perspectives have changed, still be a good show.
Well, I think that'll be a riot.
Oh, God. That one, and see, that's the reason I thought that the last show we did with Brian and Darnell here was going to be one of the best ones. Because it had that same feeling as we had with the State of Appalachia guy.
It was topical. It was contentious.
Yes, and it was intelligent. So there it is. We're back now with, for the first time for you all listening, but for the second time, as we have tempted, Brian and Darnell Moore. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thank you for having us.
So, all right. So what brings you gentlemen onto the show? What brought you here the first time and now the second time?
Well, I think you all requested us. You all wanted the liberal, Black Lives Matter, progressive.
Yeah, all the things that I think in Franklin County sometimes get thrown out as the root and cause of all the problems, we're part of. And it's like, wait a minute, we're not problematic. There are reasons behind this, and getting a chance to talk with folks and find that common ground.
Well, I also think on the surface level, I don't even think it would be you gentlemen who I would even assume I would be, because you all aren't exactly the people that I have in mind a lot of times, because a lot of times it's ones you have in mind is ones you see on TV that are in other cities and other places. Yes. And that's one of the biggest problems. I don't look at you as those type. I look at you as just people in the community that are just doing your thing. So
yes.
Probably a big part of the disconnect right there to start off with.
I think when you're going to throw a moniker or a tag on anyone, you got to be very careful about other people's perception of that tag.
Yes.
Now, and I can give you a number of examples of the BLM tag, the progressive tag, the liberal tag, the Democrat tag, the GOP tag, the Republican tag, the conservative tag, the libertarian tag. They're very defined, and they can be very misconstrued. Mm-hmm. I think we've got to be very careful about putting ourselves in those slots to start with, because it can create the wrong impression out of the gate.
Yes.
And that, to me, almost paints a picture that you can't get yourselves back from. Help me out here.
Well, I think for us, and as they said, we invite any and all to come on here and speak what you want to speak. And a lot of people, a lot of times, are just keyboard warriors, so to speak. They want to talk a big game online when they don't have to actually sit down and think about something to where they can be challenged, or questioned, or is sometimes brave of them not to get smacked upside the head. That's why they act the way they do. And it's so many of these people who are the ones that stir up the most trouble. So by coming together, and we've had so many different kinds of people on this show, and you all are no different from that perspective. We like community people. We like some of the famous people. We like some of the musicians. We like some of the business owners. Like, everybody brings a unique perspective. And I think, given everything that's went on the past couple of years in this town, I know you all are stereotyped as a part of a group, but you're individuals. So I think getting individuals on here is the way you go to kind of to break down some of these barriers that people put up for no reason whatsoever. Like, they want to look at you and basically stereotype, and it's not just, it's with everybody. Everybody gets stereotyped.
These are what the tags do.
Yes.
That tag, if you apply that tag, I'll come into something a little bit later that after the show that didn't make it had me thinking, and I'd like a more defined appreciation of your thought process behind it. But when you mention BLM, the BLM tag has created, I think, some discourse and division that I think, with the best intentions in the world, initially it wasn't going to go down that path, but now it's become divisive through its evolution, and possibly that's down to some of the BLM leadership. In fact, I know it's down to the BLM leadership that have, across various states, have had some significant financial problems with, well, let's call it embezzlement for what it is. So, an activism, but if you get tagged with a BLM tag, I don't want to go down into that racist rabbit hole, and I hate using that damn word as well, because it's not what it is. Because if you have a conversation about it, it's no longer a damn rabbit hole, right? So if we have a conversation about BLM, it's tied very closely with Antifa, and that's not good. I think that divisiveness is actually creating a bigger problem. And I understand the BLM movement. I understand how that came about. I really do. And we can discuss that at length later, because, that's why it came about. But unfortunately, the solution of BLM actually drove divisiveness even further, I think, to extremes from both sides of that equation. So the BLM issue, I was upset to see graffiti on the bridge down in downtown Rocky Mount, and whether it was BLM initiated, which I believe it was, it's still graffiti, So, and I know it was polite, the fact that it was done with chalk, and I understand, that process. But was it appropriate? Probably not, because it was still graffiti. And that's being a little bit picky.
Well, and I think that pickiness is exactly why we're here. Is the first thing is, a lot of people will say, well, I associate BLM with, all these places out here. And I go, well, have you ever been to those places and met those BLM? They go, no. Well, we're BLM here. Meet us and find out what we are about and why we were there. We were at the chalk event. We drew some of what has been called graffiti out there with our kids on the it did not feel like what we were described as afterwards. And then the rush to erase the messages that we left also felt just as harmful. And even
I'd agree with that too.
Antifa, and in my life, I have met a kid who was a Klansman, like, openly talked to me about it. I've met a kid who said I was a neo-Nazi, but you're cool, Mr. Moore. You had that conversation. I've never in my life met an Antifa, not once. So I know that they probably exist, that this is not something made up, but it seems so out of the realm of any of the Black Lives Matter events I've ever attended that it's hard to see why this would be something that is a fixation point for anybody in Franklin County.
Well, the problem is they became inextricably linked. And here's the problem. I mentioned this to my wife earlier. I said, the issue that I have, and this is going back to my childhood school days, there was a very close friend of mine, lovely lad, great family, from the north of England. I was from the south. Okay, so we know all about that north-south divide, even in England. Okay, I'm just saying.
But the rednecks are in the north in England, though.
Well, I'm not even going to go down this conversation path, Billy, because...
Well, hey, most of like northern England and southern Ireland, I guess, and Scotland is a big part of Appalachia today. So, I mean, it was essentially the...
Well, anyway, I'm going to leave that one well alone. You're not going to sucker me into that one. But they were politically motivated as a family, and that's cool. There's no issue with that whatsoever. But the thing that I got out of their action was they were supporting everything that was anti. If there was an anti-Nazi league, they were on it. I'm not saying rightly or wrongly. I'm saying, hey, why not? Quite right too. There was an anti-fox hunting league. There was whatever anti there was. It brought negative connotations to everything, and it didn't help them that they didn't bring a solution.
Yes.
They said, I'm anti whatever it is you're doing, and I'm just going to be anti. All right? I'm not going to offer you a solution. I'm not going to meet you in the middle. I'm going to be this anti, pain in the arse, thorn in your side. I'm not going to create anything positive, but I'm still going to be an irritating little git. And that anti thing we've got to get away from, because if you can't come to the table and provide a solution, guess what? You're actually part of the problem. And the Antifa thing, which, I don't even know where to start with that. I mean, they were burning cities down, rioting, without any consequence, with legal action, being arrested, being thrown in jail for doing what they were doing. Clearly illegal.
Well, I think that in my heart of hearts, I would probably venture to say that the majority of what is going on in Antifa is probably being led by alphabet boy informants. They're the ones going to throw the immediate brick, and because nobody wants to do that at first. But you get this little agitator who's probably there, who's probably on the federal government payroll. They throw the first brick through the window, and then everybody else in follows. Now, they've got all this stuff on camera. They've got all these people dead in the rights. Why they have not chosen to go after them or not yet is because it doesn't politically motivate them. And we should understand that this is not just a left or right thing. This is not, they're whatever is going on right now, how, the January 6th nonsense, you can't say that, we're a dangerous armed country and then, we are overtaken by a bunch of unarmed. I mean, what happened there? There was some violence, but it wasn't to what they made it out to be. But yet they went after them. There's people in solitary confinement that didn't do anything but walk past a line. On the other side of things, you got people in some of these cities that have caused major destruction. They've got them on camera. They know, but it's not advantageous for them to go after them. My thing I want to let everybody know is when the tide turns and the table flips, it's all going to come back on the people cheering for it. And that's what we got to avoid, because the same thing has happened. The pendulum always swings back in the other direction. Instead of worrying about getting your guy right now or getting this person, we need to find a way to say the people at the top are the problem. And we got to come to an agreement as to how we stop them from continuing to find nonsense to divide us. Because the will, if Trump ends up being the next president again and he's everything that they say he is, then it's going to be nasty in the other direction. Just as nasty as it is right now. We don't need that right now. We need unification. We don't need more division.
Well, and that's why I want to try and figure out how BLM can disassociate itself from Antifa. Because if you look at BLM in its entity, and this is where I want you guys to come in here, if I make the statement, it's for conversation. But if you take BLM away from Antifa, which I think is a sensible thing to do, I still see the BLM movement as divisive in its very nature that it says Black Lives Matter, when the easy retort, and it's very easy, and you've heard it countless times, is all lives matter. And we can go back through the history of why we're picking Black Lives Matter over all lives matter. We can do that, but the Black Lives Matter movement, from my perspective, and it's a personal perspective, has seen the division widen. And that to me concerns me, because that should be the last thing that the BLM movement should be looking to do is increase that division, when it should be looking, and therein lies the crux of that problem.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear you guys' opinion on it, because I know you're BLM supporters.
Yes.
But you're also tagged as BLM activists.
Yes.
Now, what is the difference between an activist and a supporter? I'm not sure, but the word activist may not have some of the best connotations.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got to get over that to start with. But that BLM thing and division, I think, is a big problem, because it plays right into the divisiveness that we're currently witnessing.
I think the very first thing is to replace that "or" with an "and." When we say Black Lives Matter, it's not Black Lives Matter or all lives matter. It's Black Lives Matter and. It's all lives matter because Black Lives Matter. What we know is African Americans have traditionally been the canary in the coal mine for this country. African Americans get the right to vote. Women get the right to vote. African Americans get protections. Other people get protections. When African Americans are treated through the justice system in a way that is fair, we're all going to be treated in a way that is fair. When Black Lives Matter, then all lives matter, because we tend to be the one that starts that opening for, oh, wait a minute, there is a disparity. So
That's not unreasonable.
It is.
That's not unreasonable at all.
Prying open the door. Once the door's open, we're all going through. This is a door for everybody. But if we can concentrate on what it is that's holding African Americans in higher incarceration rates, if we can focus in on what's causing African Americans to have smaller access to education, once we figure that out, what we're going to find out is that there are going to be a lot of poor whites that all of a sudden are able to move through that same opportunities. We're going to find that there are a lot of women, a lot of people who have physical incapabilities that are going to have openings that they didn't have before. And that's what the Black Lives Matter is about.
How can we do that in a not divisive manner? Because that's the problem.
I think one is we have to remove the fear of the divisiveness. Is even though you don't necessarily, when they see me walking around the monument with my flag, you go, I don't want to talk to that guy. When he parks his car and gets out and talks to me, that's when things change. Is we call ourselves activists, I think, over anything else, because we will act on the things that we believe in. I'll stand up and I'll say, hey, look, this is me. I'm wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Come ask me why this is important to me. And now, not everybody's capable of doing it. There are some people that wear a Black Lives Matter shirt, and you ask them, they'll curse you out because groups are full of.
Well, I mean,
the
exactly, and this is part of the retort that you get is if I was to question, not yourselves, I mean, because we know what's going on here, right? But if I was to go up to someone with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt and say, by the way, mate, I find that a little bit divisive, he's going to swing around and say, well, you're a racist, white supremacist, whatever. And that has to stop, because that isn't the case most of the time. So, how we address that narrative, it's a two-way street, obviously. Hey, let's open that can of worms.
I think a big part of it is recognizing when you're dealing with activists as opposed to when you're dealing with supporters. Is somebody who says, you know what, I can't explain why I support Black Lives Matter, but I know Darnell, and I like him, and he supports it, so I'm okay with that. He can't answer your questions, but he can say, go talk to that guy.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, as a spokesman, perhaps for BLM, you've got some negative press that you've got to shake out.
We do.
Because when I see the BLM thing, my reaction to it isn't positive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's honest. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a racist for saying that. The fact remains, I see it as divisive. So as a spokesman for that, I say you've got quite a task to accomplish.
But I also have to embrace some of the divide.
Oh, absolutely.
Some of the divide is saying, listen, there is a real problem with the way criminal justice is done. And now we've got to get to a point where we're saying, listen, you got to work with us, or you're either feeding the problem. And that's almost just as bad as anything else. The people who stood silently while Ruby Bridges was heading into the school felt like part of the crowd that was yelling at her.
All right, here comes something contentious. I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for.
Well, but I'm gonna take right off the table. There's nothing racist because somebody would have asked you a question. Part of what we're here for is we need all of those questions. You heard somebody say, "Hey, why wouldn't those Black Lives Matter people answer this?" This is the place to get that question out.
Right on. So here's the contention with some of that. We talk about incarceration rates and arrest rates. Let's even go into academic achievement rates.
Yes.
Now, this is a tough one, and bear with me on it.
Yes.
Don't throw anything at me. If we're talking about academic rates and achievement, we're seeing the black population or immigrant population achieve to a lower extent. Mm-hmm. What we've got to look at is, why is that?
Yes.
Now, I'll say the same to you again. When it comes down to incarceration rates and arrest rates, we have to look into why is that. And I'll throw it out there. I think a lot of these problems are down to the breakdown of the family unit. I think that's a huge problem.
Yes.
And it's nothing that the white man's going to fix, right? I mean, this isn't something I'm going to swing around and say, you know what? If you're a black guy and you fathered 4 different kids from four different ladies, I'm not going to be the guy to swing around and say, you know what, you might want to zip it up.
Right.
Or not rely on the welfare system, maybe as the mother of the 4 different kids from 4 different fathers. And this is contentious ground, and some people do not want to hear it. And I'm going to get scathed for it, but this is the reality.
Well, I'm going to pull some of the scathe off because I've got some answers for that.
Go for it.
And I'd say that we'll hit the welfare piece first, because African Americans right now, we have about a 75% out of wedlock rate. And oftentimes they'll go, they've got this culture that builds in where fathers have decided not to marry mothers so they could get this welfare check. And I'd say, first off, if you know any father that would not be part of their child's life for $400 a month.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So first off, part of the cultural tag that's been added is there's something ingrained in African-American men where we are not going to be part of a child's life for $400.
What a concept.
Right. And that's where that first statement of that's a racist statement starts to pop up, is that you could pay somebody enough not to be part of the child's life. When we go back to the beginning where we first started those, we were at 30% out of wedlock rate. Thomas Sowell, you got him over on the desk. One of the things he always likes to say is when you're looking at this, compared to what? The white out of wedlock rate right now is about 30%, where we were back then. Back then, the white out of wedlock rate was around 7%.
Oh, it's increasing. There's no denial. And we've got a major problem with the breakdown of the family unit.
Yes.
And this is across all races.
And I think that's where the problem is. So if we go back, the truth is, if we're at 30% then and the white out of wedlock rate was 7%, we've always had this huge problem. So now if we go look at some historical issues, and we can just look at Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, his mother and father were not legally allowed to be married. Booker T. Washington's father was not the man who married Booker. She was raped by a plantation owner outside of it at a time where they were still, I believe, together. She did not have ownership of her own body. They could not be married. This is where we started. This is where we started as African Americans. Now we get the next step, and this now goes to the monument. Where do we go to get marriage licenses. I'm going to have to run to the courthouse. Our courthouse in Franklin County put up a Confederate monument before we put up a U.S. flag following the Civil War. It was a sign. It felt like a sign that this state of Virginia, we're not done yet. And that Confederate Constitution looks close to the U.S. Constitution, but it is not. So now we've got this fight right from the beginning where we have to start by reclaiming the ownership of our own bodies. We have to start by reclaiming the space inside of legal places. And we've got to make the same fight. Now, if we look at the growth in rate from 30% to 75%, it is still smaller than the growth of 7% to 30% amongst the white population. So even with this historical chain, we're not terrible.
Well, you know, before the welfare state, before welfare was implemented, if I'm not mistaken, actually black families had a lower divorce rate than white families. At one point in time, probably between the 40s and the 60s, the black community was actually growing exponentially better. And, you know, for me, I know everybody, you know, you want to say we got to go to the courthouse for licenses and stuff like this. Well, I'm just pointing one with the government out of absolutely everything, because I think at the end of the day, you can trace every single problem we have back to the government. You know, it was government saying that places had to be segregated. It was government saying that you had to do this. It was government using conscription during the Civil War. It was a government, you know, who was making these laws to be. When at the end of the day, the majority of the people, as it is today, I think we're just going on about their business, because much like today, back then, it was the 1% who owned slaves. And I think that's one of the problems that we can't get over is, you know, a lot of people that aren't as invested as you all are, and a lot of people aren't invested as we are, they just look at it as, well, it was just nothing but hate against black and white. That wasn't the case. You know, a lot of people, like my great-great-grandparents, they were so poor, they could never afford a slave. The slaves were the kids. They, you know, from the time they were 5 years old, were out there on the farm working. And they were getting their ass beat if they didn't end up doing what they were supposed to do. So,
in fact, they were competing with free labor.
Exactly. So you go back, and you know, it was the 1%. It wasn't all of us. It wasn't any of our ancestors that owned slaves. And it's no different today. They all still own us. Our chains are just different, and they own more of us. Our chains now are debt, credit cards, student loans, things like that, to keep us reliant on their guidance and wisdom and freedom.
This bursts into another conversation in its entirety, because this isn't race related directly, even though we're talking about debt slavery and federal government over state government over any government. And this is a can of worms.
Open it.
You know, I mean,
That's
if we're going to have that discussion, I'm going to swing straight round and say,
bring it.
Man, I'm not going to go in the swear box just yet. But the federal government can get its damn hands off of education, because that was not one of their founding principles of governance. And what they've done thus far, quite frankly, blows my mind in how they've corrupted an education system. And it's in the toilet. I mean, we know it's in the toilet. And you made, and we're going to come down to the CRT thing.
I don't disagree, I think it's our fault in Franklin County.
Absolutely,
Franklin
it is.
County will accept any parent volunteers to come sit and eat lunch, to work in those libraries. I've got parents that are complaining that their kids are going to check out a book from a library when the library is begging to have additional people help as librarians.
Yeah, I mean,
the kids are going to pass stuff around on the buses when we're begging for drivers and bus monitors.
Would you want to work on a school bus?
What I'm telling you,
hell no.
But we can't be afraid of our children and then pretend that we're trying to protect them. We have to
elaborate on that a little bit.
We have to put ourselves on those school buses. We have to talk to our kids. We can't fix this by saying we're going to have the school board regulate something, or we're going to have things trickle through the teachers. We've got to go into our classrooms.
All right,
we've got to go into the cafeteria.
I'll go with you that to a certain extent, but. And I've and you've been present to some of them. I know you both have, with some of my more contentious school board meetings. And I have no regrets about anything I've said with that regard, because I believe there's a grievance. But to say that, you know, we all need to step up and work on the buses, and we all need to participate in this is all well and good, but the guidelines and the structure as to what you can and can't do is dictated, wait for it, not by the school board.
Mm-hmm.
It's dictated by the administrators.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the administrators, and I'm not looking to pick a fight with any of the Franklin County Board administrators through elementary, middle, or high school. I'm not looking to pick that fight because I think they've done an extremely good job in deferring some of the madness that's been coming out of not just Richmond, as administrators in Richmond and the state, but federally as well. Now, the advantage that Richmond and the feds have over education, which in my mind is where we lost complete control, is they have the stick and they're using it, and we should have the stick and they should have the carrot.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to
stick.
What do y'all gentlemen think about school choice? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I need
Okay,
more
so
of a
basically
definition.
what it is every student in Virginia, let's say roughly, costs the state $20,000 a year. Instead of that child having to follow the money, now the money follows the child. So that $20,000 instead could maybe go to a parent who might decide they want to work part-time now and homeschool their kid. Or maybe a parent uses that $20,000 to send their kid to a private school, or smaller communities, maybe here in Rocky Mount, maybe in Callaway, parents get together and say, hey, we'll spend us $20,000, we'll chip in and we'll hire a teacher. Maybe somebody here in the school system is really well, they can actually make more money than they would in the school system. They would actually, the cream would rise to the top. The bad teachers would be thrown out. You knew what your kids would be getting taught. You could always intermingle them. You still have your sports so they can still connect and things like that, but they're getting the education that they want. On top of that, now you start pulling money out of the public schools. Well, now they start to drop. Now you're not paying as many teachers. You're not paying as many pensions. You're not paying facilities upkeep. All that money is going to the people in the community as opposed to corporations and state employees and state pensions and things like that. And I know, and we all know people that are teachers. There are teachers in this room. I've been, a teacher before, good friends with them. And I think every single person who would get completely offended at the idea probably doesn't want to work as hard as maybe some of the teachers who would thrive. And I think a lot of people in this room, when you think about it, if you could get all of the children that are part of families that agree with, you all and want to see the changes that you all push for, well, they all chip together and find one of y'all and pay y'all $120,000 a year to teach our kids instead of the, $60,000 that they're making. So basically that's what it is. The money follows the kid.
I'm all for that. I think that accountability is a great thing. It keeps that system honest to a degree, and it gets it out of federal hands because, as I've said, I'm a constitutional guy and I have absolutely no idea why the federal government is involved in education when the states should have retained that power, and that's all down to tax dollars and how they collect it and how they use the carrot and stick. It's as simple as that. And if we don't take control of our tax dollars instead of sending it off to Richmond or DC, if we can't control that, guess what? We ain't going to control a damn thing. So that game's over. And there's some tax issues in the states that need some addressing in a serious manner. But that's another podcast completely, because let me tell you, I'm going to ruffle some real feathers with this one.
But this one hits well, as I think most African Americans are deathly afraid of that. Is the belief is what would happen is that the tax dollars would start to go to fund schools that would then kick out black students. Or stop accepting them.
Yeah, but you all can get together and form your own school. And you got the money to do it.
We have done that in the past.
That's called segregation.
Tried really hard
That's
to
called
break
segregation.
out of that.
And let's
well, no, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be segregation, but you should have the choice to be able to do that. And if that's what you choose to do, look, as long as you're not bothering anybody else, you're free to do what you want to do. I would prefer, and we spoke about this the last time, I would prefer that a lot of the part of the Civil Rights Act would go away simply because I would rather have somebody tell me what their views are before I walk into their restaurant. Because if they don't want me coming in there because I'm a white person, well, then I won't give you my business. I don't want you spitting on my food and getting sick. I'll go somewhere else. Just like y'all, why would y'all want to walk into a restaurant that said, a sign on the door says black people not allowed? I mean, I wouldn't want that. I don't think anybody would want that.
Part of the problem with that is that would put us in the position of a perpetual customer. If I could not step into a restaurant, that means I could never be a caterer. I could never run Grubhub. If I don't have access to the same free market that you have access to, I can't grow.
Hey folks, just wanted to take a quick second to talk about one of our sponsors for today, Foster's General Store. It's growing season in Virginia year-round now, so go check out Foster's for all of your growing needs. They have Fox Farm Soil and Nutrients, Humboldt Secret Supplies, Gaia Green, Dr. Earth Dry Amendments, as well as Coast of Maine products, Grove Bags, Fish Shit, and all your hydro tents and lights that you're going to need. If you're supporting local, I've known these guys forever. They're phenomenal human beings. So go down there and see Charlie and Hunter and tell them you heard it from the Appalachian Podcast. You can catch them at 17175 Virgil H. Good Highway in Rocky Mount, or give them a shout at 540-489-0085. No, we have the same free access. You're free to choose what you want to do. And I think I've got enough faith in the people to say, right now, if somebody opened a business in town that said, we're not going to serve black people, I think they'd be out of business in a week. So I've got enough faith in our community to say that, and if they didn't say they had just enough customers to survive, then I can look at the people that go in and out of that place and say, you know what, I don't want to do business with that person. I don't want to have them come over my house and do my work or build my house or do this. You're letting me know what kind of person you are. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. So let them out themselves.
If Franklin County Public Schools have been putting African American students on longer punishments, removing them from classroom situations and more frequent, then we're dealing with exactly the same thing. We're dealing with African American students who aren't being served in the same way the other students are.
Yeah, abolish the public schools.
But we don't hear a backlash on this. And I don't know that it would be any different if a restaurant, if the 13% of African Americans in this county weren't served regularly, if it would make enough of a blip, except to that 13%.
No, I think it absolutely would. I think enough people in this town, I'd get irritated at that. I'd blast them. The only reason I don't blast a lot of restaurants now is, over the COVID stuff is because, hey, you know what? I'll let that one slide. But if somebody out here was discriminating against somebody for any other reason other than, you were a scumbag, then I'd be blasting them all day long on this place. And you should.
Historically, Franklin County has proven to be that kind of place, is doing things like adding that additional board member at large to make sure that there was a voice from that black community as part of the school board. We have historically done things to make sure that there is an expansion, but we've also done some things to try and avoid those kind of expansions, such as setting up the Booker T. Washington School so that we could qualify for that separate but equal monitor.
That was going through the government though, right?
But
you're having to apply.
We are the people.
Exactly. And we don't need the government though. No way, screw all that. You don't have to go through all the application fees process. You can just go start it yourself and avoid the red tape. The red tape is there to make us all have to struggle. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like the hotel we got going down in Rocky Mount right now, how long has that thing tried to be going? Do y'all know anything about that?
Just what I've read on his.
I haven't got a chance to read it yet. I've reached out to him a couple of times. Come on and tell us what your issues are. Like, why are we stifling growth in this community? I don't care who it is or why it is. If somebody's trying to bring a good, legitimate business in this town, let's get rid of the red tape nonsense, all the application fees and the zone ordinance and all that stuff. All that noise is just there so they can pick and choose the winners. And that's it. And yeah, I get it. Being 13% of the population, I can see where y'all would say, you know what, we're never going to get to be picked as the winners. And you're probably right. And it's not because it's I think necessarily a black and white thing. I just think it's because you do represent such a small part of the population that you can easily be cast off because it's all political and it's about the votes. And you just don't have that. So you remove the government from that stuff, remove all the power they have to hold us down and make us jump through hoops. Then we all work together as a community a little bit better. We can find the people that we're like-minded with and go on about our business, I'm
going to pick up on a comment you made, right? And I can't help it. And he's coming. All right. The member at large position, and it took several months for me to get even close to understanding what that position was about.
It's complicated.
It was very, and no one would say it. So I said, now hang about. So what is this member at large position about? Because I didn't get it. Right? We got a member at large who through the dynamic of an uneven board number, which I could not fathom. Instead of being a 7-member board, it was an 8-member board. You can get 4 on 4. You are destined for stagnation. That blew me away. And I looked into it a little bit deeper. And I wondered, what the hell's going on with this member at large? What the hell is this about? I want to know what this is about. And no one would come up and have an honest conversation with me and say, "Oh, this is
Talking to the wrong people."
Yeah.
Well, no, there was. I spoke across the community about what the member at large was. Oh, this is about representation of minorities. And I went, "Oh, hang about. I'm not quite sure. I think that's the right thing to do." And I'll tell you why. And it's contentious yet again, but that's why I'm here, right? If you have a member at large who encompasses the whole of Franklin County to support, who doesn't represent a district, that's a key point here. Who is that member at large accountable to? And that's a key point. Not only does it unbalance the voting of the school board, which I pointed out on a number of occasions, but it also, to me, it struck me as something as very un-American. In so much as, well, bear with me on this. I know you're going to chomp in and have a good old go at it, because at 13%, of the population, we've got to get away from this black and white stuff. All right, if we don't get away from it, we're destined for continued division and unpleasantness. So we've got to get away from it. And supporting a member at large to be a voting presence for a minority population struck me as an imbalance of democracy. Because as 13%, bugger the 13%, actually. Let's ignore that completely. Those statistics, throw them out the damn window. They mean nothing. You're now looking at supporting a minority or having voting rights for a minority, and you're actually destabilizing democracy by introducing the member at large to support the minority. Do you see where I'm going with this? And that kind of blew my mind. Now, the person that we both know, and I'm not going to mention, came out with, I thought, some pretty racist statements. And that was, I think, careless of her to do that, but I'd seen enough of her interaction from the board that made me think, we've got the wrong person in a job here. And perhaps it shouldn't be about minority representation. What it should be about is demographic representation to a degree. Where was I going with this? Good Lord, I've just lost a tangent. But you get my gist.
That's what
right?
German beer will do to you.
I do. But I'll say, one, I think it's almost one of the more American things we can do if we think about how we, elect congressmen and how muddled it is to get.
Oh, that's a joke in itself.
It's a joke, but it's also complicated by design. This idea that you can't wreck a great ship if it moves slow. When we created this second piece, we got some very contentious things that the board had to deal with, but we couldn't deal with them and just hide them because we had this very slow voting board. This was a very American thing where we had to hash it out. We had to come to meetings. We had to talk to each other. We had to go on and on about something because we had this very slow moving board.
But it was political. And that's where the school board should have been apolitical. And it got political. It remains political. And here's a thread that I couldn't recall. As that member at large was leaving her post and her speech, final speech, I touched on the point that an imbalance of voting members on the board was key for progress. Now, she stifled that for a year and a half. But on her leaving, she decided that actually because a white guy's come in as the member at large, we should now consider getting rid of the member at large because there's an imbalance of you
understand
see where I'm going with that.
I don't think it's just that it was a white guy. I think it was because it was a white guy who was absent for involvement in the African American community. If this was a white guy who had regularly gone to NAACP meetings, if this was a white
or would
guy,
even attend,
who
Fair point.
had
He's
been part
been
of the
invited.
Black Lives
Fair point.
Matter,
But let's get
if
rid
he'd
of,
been with
as
the
far as I'm
Hispanic community,
that representation should have been addressed with the districts that we vote our school board representatives on. Now, I'm going to diminish this a little bit because I want to make the school board apolitical, and it needs to be apolitical for all the right reasons. And to remove that position would redress that imbalance, because it needs to be an uneven number of school board members to make an effective voting democratic process. Now, if you can't be represented in your democratic district, that's because you're a minority. Now, I'm not saying you're black. I'm not saying you're Mexican. I'm not saying you're LGBT, A, B, C, D, what the hell ever. I'm saying you're a minority, and in a democratic process, sometimes it just happens. So the majority, unfortunately for the minority, get to play the game. And that's how it works. Now, we can work within that framework and have very constructive discussions about how we can address certain minority and black issues within the community. But I don't think creating something out of nothing that overrides the district voting process is a good idea. I just don't think it is.
I think what scares a lot of us is this idea that it came out of nothing, which is absolutely being sold. I mean, I think that even goes back to the crux of the Confederate monument. This idea that we didn't have segregation one generation back.
Yeah.
That we didn't have
not even 10 years before you were born.
Yeah. I mean,
that staggers me. It really does.
Right. These things didn't come out of nothing. They came out of real and ingrained problems inside of this county. And even with the Confederate monument, a lot of folks are like, well, my family didn't know anything about what the Confederacy was about. If they enlisted in Pennsylvania County, which is very likely, there was a banner up saying, "You are here to kill abolitionist foes." They knew. Now, if they were conscripted, then I'm certain they wouldn't want a monument in the first place to that 4 years where they were forced to fight. So then what is that monument really about? And then it goes back to, what is that seat really about? Are we ready to say segregation, as it happened in Franklin County, no longer has an impact on education going forward? Are we ready to remove even that statement that you had to dig for before? Because even with that person there, people aren't willing to tell you about it. We're not willing to admit that part of our history.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like with the CRT argument that we're working backwards.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to. This thankfully it's come full circle, because I know the last podcast that vanished into the
Ether.
internet sphere of God knows where. I noticed and I recall that you guys were both very strong proponents of CRT.
Yes.
And
Hold on.
As we understand it.
I still don't understand what CRT is.
right. Well, this is why I want your opinion, because from what I understand is, you know what, I'm not going to interrupt. I'm going to say, I'd like to hear your opinion on what CRT does for you, because I don't think it's the cure-all pill that everyone thinks it is. So I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate too.
I think it's made up. I think it's a boogeyman that people are looking for to be angry about.
Yeah, but I've heard the word boogeyman before when it's been applied to CRT, and that's a narrative that has come out as a defense against anti-CRT. So I want to get down to the roots of it, what the guttural feeling is.
Attending those school board meetings, sitting there and seeing somebody get up there and say, we should stick to the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic. And almost,
I was one of those guys.
They left out history.
You cannot leave out history.
But at the same time, they highly paraphrased Martin Luther King, disregarding the fact that what he went through.
Aren't all historical figures paraphrased, though?
Well, I mean, just, yada, yada, yada. We're all together in this together. We don't see color. It's pretty much the gist of what you all were saying.
I mean, we both know that in the reality of that situation, that's not the case, right? I mean, let's be honest about it. I'd love it to be not the case.
Yes.
But the fact remains it is. But let's get beyond that. But I want to know why CRT appears to be such a crutch.
It's too complicated to teach in the schools.
Yes.
Well, that's why
anytime somebody comes in and says, hey, you're dealing with CRT in the high school, they're doing CRT, that's when the boogeyman shows up. CRT for me is always going to be the idea that there's no such thing as a bad race. And critical race theory means if there's no bad race, then we have to start and think, okay, African Americans and Hispanics together make up close to 40% of the prison population, in spite of making up about 25% of the U.S. population. Why is that? Then we go, well, there's culture issues. So African Americans listen to rap music and go commit crimes, but white people can listen to rap music and they don't. So
this isn't an M&M thing, is it?
No. It's this idea that when we dismiss a problem that hits a community larger because there's something wrong with that community, critical race theory says stop. What other factors might be there? That's what critical race theory asks us to do.
Okay. Well, again, let me just play devil's advocate for one interjection. Now, the CRT, I absolutely agree with you, is not taught in K-12 public schools. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. It is a university, college degree,
graduate level.
Which part of other stuff, it's not just critical race theory. There was critical gender theory.
Yes.
And there was
don't get me going.
And as far as I know, I can't remember the person who basically what her name was or his name was, but it all falls back to kind of a Marxist ideology when it's broken down from the beginning.
Right.
And like you all said, it is a college course. So no, they are not teaching. And this is just from what I'm gathering and from what I've understood. It's not being taught in the school. It's basically critical race applied principles. So they're not really teaching the college level course. What they're doing is they're applying these theories to regular math problems and English problems. And what these problems end up doing, and I've read some of these in some of the books, and it's teaching children that they're supposed to be victims, in my opinion, because it'll say, you'll have a math problem, say, well, if Stephen is pulled over by the cops 3 times, but Jamal is pulled over by the cops 7 times, that's just putting in his head that a traditional black name is going to be more likely to be pulled. It's these small little seeds that it's putting in there. And I think that's where a lot of people have the issues with it. And in my personal opinion, like you all said, it's the boogeyman. It's something that is put here once again to divide us and have us argue, because instead of us focusing on what the real problem is the people implementing this stuff, we start focusing on each other.
And it continues the divisiveness. Mm-hmm. And CRT, I think, as a college or university course or whatever, have at it. Where's it going to get you in life? Go and waste how many thousands of your parents' dollars. Have at it.
Well,
but the tenets of CRT over the last few years have been applied in the public school education system. I thank Governor Northam for rejecting them. And it comes down to the very unpleasant subject of LGBT, gender identity, gender politics. And here's one thing before I open the floor, and it disturbs me immensely, is we have friends in the North, damn Yankees, and they were being asked, their 13 or 14-year-old son was being asked in public school about anal sex. That is totally unacceptable.
Yes.
Yeah,
and this gender stuff has got to stop. And I thank Governor Northam for stamping on it, because it's a load of bollocks.
It feels like a big jump
Oh, it's huge.
from
Why are we doing
a
this?
teacher teaching about anal sex, which is horrible.
Why are you doing it?
Right.
What
can't
subject?
imagine,
Exactly.
and especially with our current SOL scores, I can't imagine how that's fitting in. But
It's in a
conflating
curriculum and it's in the
conflating that
States.
with a student who is more comfortable using the female restroom. Those two things don't feel like they fit to me. One,
Gender
They
identity. It's bollocks. I mean, who on earth thought this was subject matter for discussion with an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old? You've got to be kidding me, right? And this really is the breakdown of the public school system, and they've brought it on themselves. And unless the administrators address it, and it shouldn't be for a governor to swing round and say, we are not putting up with this in our schools. It should be for us, right? This is our decision. And if I go into a school board and say, if you think you're teaching my kid about anal sex, guess what? You're going to be lying down real quick. And it's going to be because I beat the shit out of you.
how is it so easy for you to go in and threaten the school board, but so difficult for you to go to the elementary schools and be a hall monitor?
I would gladly be a hall monitor.
Sign up. We need you. And I think what you will hear in those hallways when you meet students who are themselves struggling with these gender issues, and you then have the same way you now have
Don't
a
make
face.
them an issue. This isn't an issue that needs discussing. Don't sow that
it's a
seed
student.
of
It's
doubt.
a student who needs love and care, just like every other student in our system.
Got no problem with that.
If you
but
were
is this not
personally
grooming?
there-
Is this not grooming?
I don't imagine you would. I don't imagine I would. I don't. If
Hell
we,
no. But I tell you what,
So go into the schools and be present. That's what we need. We need you folks to sign up, to not complain, but to be on these buses, be in these schools.
Well, here's the problem: is the public school system in itself. What you're asking is antithetical to the idea behind it in general. The idea behind the public school is to essentially let the state raise your children. It's for you to be able to say, okay, well, I can go do this for the day and my kids are going to be there. It doesn't do the public school system any justice to teach kids anything other than how to be a good steward of the state. That's why we pledge allegiance to a cloth. And that's what it's turned into. I'm not saying that's what it's always been. And I'm not saying everybody that's a part of it is a part of that as a whole. But we are at the mercy of state and federal funding. And when they
Carrot and stick.
And when they do things like that, we're not going to make the right decisions. So if you're expecting the parents to show, and I'm not saying for Simon or anybody, but if you're expecting a lot of parents to show up, well, the whole reason they send their kids to public school in the first place is because they don't have the time or they don't have the desire. So if you end the public schools altogether, is what I would be pushing for, and let that money follow the students, or keep the public schools. If anybody wants to send their students there, they could be able to make better decisions, and they could have the right people in positions. And that's where we have our fall, is just because we're held hostage.
Wait, that's exactly the situation. We are held hostage by the tax system as to how we present our education system to our kids.
Okay. So now I think I see a very big schism where I think we absolutely need attachment. I think this is another point where having that member at large. For most of the black community, we don't send our kids to school to be wards of the state or to be part of it. We send them to school because we're not masters of content.
No.
For the most part,
it's nothing against the parents. It's not the parents send their kids to school.
We
with,
need all our schools to
with
be
an
this way.
idea that they're going to come home with an education. And some parents, and a lot of parents, do send them there because it's a babysitting. And a lot of parents like you always sending your kids there because you want to get the best education you possibly can for them. My point is, though, all of our good intentions of sending our kids there, it's not happening. And that's because of the state. And that's because, look at the spending since Department of Education the spending has went up on that XY axis, and the level of intelligence has slightly declined while all other countries have been surpassing us. I wouldn't care. Look, I'm an anarchist. I don't want any tax dollars taken. Taxation is 100% theft. If, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole.
The way they spend it, you're damn right.
But that's my starting point. Let's say if I want to be a minimalist, I would much rather my tax dollars go to support the communities here, black, whites, Hispanic, Asian, I don't care, than going and spending for banker wars overseas, than to line the pockets of politicians, than for any of that nonsense. But unfortunately, this is the world we live in, is my tax dollars are going to these things. So the more we eliminate the government from the equation, I think the more we'll be able to come together. And that's the problem, is the government has a hold to the public school system. We want to send our kids there and hope for the best, but that's not their intentions. That's not they don't want us to go out there and be a smart population. Because what do smart people do? They start questioning. When you start questioning, you start revolting. See, black people you all have every right to revolt. And the public school system does nothing but suppress that ideology. And I just, like anybody else, I think you'd be doing a whole lot better if...
But most of that revolt grew out of the public school system for us. Martin Luther King having access to Morehouse, having access to Virginia State University, which is a government institution. It was put there, partially because we weren't going to be allowed into Virginia Tech, but also because the state believed we needed to start developing land grant schools. We're capable of creating this activism because we have education. We send our kids to school because I know the person at school who's going to teach my daughter algebra knows it better than me. That needs to be the new desire of the community. If we can get everybody who comes to the school board not to go, I want my kids to have access to a teacher every day that knows more about algebra than I could teach her at home, then I'm going to have a great school system. That's what we're fighting for. That's what we've always felt the member at large seat was there to remind people about.
Let me be again. Yeah, bloody hell! I don't want to be just a contentious arsehole on
but we need those things out.
Well, no, I agree.
So it is not you, but these statements are out there.
Like, get them out. I mean, the more people that listen to this, hopefully they get to think about it and go, you know what? These guys around these 4 microphones have actually got there's some logic and sense going in there.
Yes.
But now I've met both you folks, lovely people. Larry, I understand, is going to be representing, or going to try and get the vote for the Snow Creek Board of Supervisors. Yes. That's representation.
It is.
And, that's what we're talking about.
He's still battling a very low percentage of support in Franklin County.
And I think part of what the two of us understand is the thin hair by which he became who he is and how he is now eligible.
Absolutely. How did I get here?
How close he was to not attend
I'm an immigrant.
a college.
Don't forget, yes. I'm an immigrant, right?
Right. And I think part of that goal, part of even that member at large seat, is to remind people there's somebody that if we widen that space and let one other person walk through, we're going to have somebody who can come back to our community, a 30-year military veteran, multiple master's degrees.
Super nice guy, by the way.
Super nice guy who wasn't going to go to college, who didn't have that on his radar, but had somebody who stepped further than he was willing to do to get him enrolled.
That's the kind of guy you need leading communities. I totally agree with you.
It was a teacher. But it was a teacher. These are the teachers we had in Franklin County that I still believe we have in Franklin County. And if we can spend our time investing in those teachers, going and meeting on back to school night, you don't have any kids, you can go to a school board meeting, you can go to back to school night. Talk to that teacher. What does that teach? You need more tissues in your classroom? Let's get you more tissues. Find out what they need. How can you support them? What are you teaching? And if they start giving you that crazy stuff, I'm going to teach anal sex in second grade, then you start going, okay, now I got to go to a school board meeting.
Yeah, but you see, the school board, and that's been my experience with the school board, is... and it irritates the crap out of me, is that you can get your 3 minutes. Well, now it's not just your 3 minutes, right? You've got to submit your proposal to speak the Thursday before the school board meeting. The agenda for the school board meeting may not come out until Friday. The deck is being stacked against input from parents where we can get a reaction from the school board. And this is trivial, and the way the reason I say it's trivial is because they don't give a shit, right, about what I have to say at that school board meeting, because they don't have to answer to me. Mm-hmm. There is no recourse on on anything that I have to say or the floor has to say. They have got the vote to represent their districts. Now, whether that's a member at large or the districts, irrelevant, right? And they've got their 4 years. And you try and pull someone out, all right, who suddenly has changed the colour of their cloth and is not representing their districts or their citizens and residents within that district. How do you do that? Because if you're not representing your what's the word I'm looking for here? The constituents. If you're not representing the constituents by popular vote over certain matters, and I'm not saying we need to have a referendum on every bloody thing, but if you're not following their path of general, this is how we want it done, then you're in. I can't unseat you. There is no method as a community that we can unseat someone that we disagree with, having maybe got in under false pretenses. You can't unseat them. You can't do it. I've tried.
I think most of the time we can. What we have trouble doing is
you've got to outvote them.
We have
you've
trouble
got 4 years
unseating other people. So most of the time, I'm happy with my governor. But if I can just get Kentucky's governor to vote, you know what I mean?
I hear
we
you.
have trouble unseating other places.
But if we concern ourselves with local policies, local actions, local representatives, not just on the board of supervisors or the school board, it's to deal with school administrators. I'm going to come back to it because I found out and I figured out that there's the problem within the school system is the administrators. And I'm not talking about Franklin County administrators. I'm talking about Richmond administrators from a state perspective. I'm not even going to go, my thoughts on the federal issue and Department of Education. That to me just blows my mind. But if we don't control local politics as a community for the benefit of the community, and we cut this divisive shit out, we're going to be singing the same tune after November. We're going to be sending the same tune 2 years down the road, 2024. We're going to be playing the same tune ad infinitum, and it serves us no good.
Who gets to decide what is decisive? When we said we want the Confederate monument down, and 70% of the county said, let's keep it. 70% of the county
Come
said,
up with a compromise.
The history.
Come up with a compromise. Okay?
Like relocating it?
That's not a bad compromise.
Oh, it was on the table.
Well, no, but and we had this discussion with the Phantom show that disappeared, and I think, and this is from a completely outsider's perspective, and I see both sides of this argument. I'll probably get slated from whatever side, whichever way you go, you're going to get shot at, right? So bring it on. I've got mixed feelings about the statue, as you well know. I think it has a place because American lives were lost. This was a Confederate state. It was a Southern state, but they were still Americans. So you still have that right of commemoration, whether you're on the winning side or the losing side. And it's as simple as that. If it was to be relocated at, let's say, the War Memorial, which would be, in my humble opinion, probably the best place for it to be relocated, at what point would the community swing around and go, you know what, we can live with that?
Well,
I'm not asking you to smash it up, because what happened with Lee in Richmond, I mean, I thought that was tragic. I mean, that was a beautiful bronze statue, regardless, it was a work of art, right?
And let's keep in mind as well that Robert E. Lee said that, I would free every slave if it could keep the Union together, while Lincoln simultaneously said, I would keep every black person enslaved if it would keep the Union together. Like,
but I don't want to go. I don't want to go down
Robert
there.
Lee also said specifically not to build any monuments to him.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but
Depicting the
exactly. But that
He
monument
killed American soldiers. And of the Confederate soldiers, he's chosen as one of the outstanding Confederate soldiers, but for the most part, he also overwhelmingly killed his own soldiers to gain ground that often didn't play well.
That's true of every war. Look
yeah,
at
if you
want
to go back, we also killed our own people in the Revolutionary War. You know, we killed British soldiers who were technically our people.
But there were
no
generals,
offense, Simon.
There were Confederate generals that didn't suffer the same, but they weren't flashy and they weren't representative of what we hoped Lee would represent. And so some of that statue has to do more with how we are presenting him and what we wanted to present.
I think,
as opposed to any great military.
Now we'll come back on the Jubal Early conversation we had prior to this, right? So we'll come back to that. I think as an unnamed soldier, which is what he represents
he's
at the courthouse.
An officer.
Well, an officer, regardless, he's an unnamed soldier.
Well, the majority of the soldiers from Franklin County were enlisted, so it doesn't even represent them.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Well, the majority of soldiers anywhere enlisted.
Yeah.
They always give the glory to the officers anyway.
And I think what's crazy is that right down the road here at the Memorial Park, their names are listed on the monument. All the Confederate soldiers from Franklin County.
Now, the Union soldiers that left Franklin County to join the U.S. Army are not listed on that monument.
What's on the monument is a Confederate flag. On
the courthouse
Jubal
monument.
Early, Daughters of Confederacy, is represented.
Right, but we're still looking at technically an unnamed soldier who was representing his state.
That's where we get. And what evidence do we have? So when we go back to Thomas Sowell, what evidence do we have of what he was representing?
But we're going to get beaten up over this because it actually serves no purpose, really. If we were to swing around and say, you know what, just for shits and giggles, right, I'm going to swing around and say, I've got the power to relocate that monument and put it down at the War Memorial. We think it's more appropriate that that's where it should be. We can't mess around with the Daughters of the Confederacy Jubilee, what the heck, whatever. But it's removed.
Mm-hmm.
Would that solve the conversation? Or would it continue to say, you need to get it out of the War Memorial?
I hope it would continue. Yeah. Because then we could create more honest conversations about what actually happened.
Yeah, but that's the past. You see, if we keep digging back in the past, you're turning over the old sod, right?
Yes.
That's full of contention, misdirection. We got to get away from that.
I think the problem is we've been ignoring it too long and acting like it didn't happen.
I'm not.
If the southern states, and I think we brought this up last time, if the southern states had said, hey, listen, we're going to free every African American and allow them to vote, all of a sudden the South is a powerhouse. The population in the South.
Don't you think the North was shit scared about that?
How do we start to convince our fellow countrymen that giving more people access is the way to create a stronger state?
Well, isn't that a point of order, actually? That's just touched me. If that is an argument, yes, one then has to swing around and say, was the North not involved in suppressing that?
Yes. I think we often get into confusion because we'll say things like, "Oh, the Civil War wasn't about slavery." For the Confederacy, it was 100% about slavery. It was in their opening documents. Virginia's documents said that we're lined up. The Confederate Constitution's full of it. For the North, it was not. Not until about 2 years in for most Northerners. About 2 years in, once many of those soldiers started having groups of African Americans follow their troops and started to actually meet them, then it started to evolve into a place where they said, okay, we're willing to fight for these people we now know. But they were unknown slaves,
how can you say that because you weren't there?
We have writing. We have letters. This is not ancient history.
Right.
We have letters like from the Ketchum brothers, who were two brothers, Union soldiers. One of them died from a bullet in Gettysburg. Wrote, they were Quakers, gave up their vow of violence to join the Civil War, to fight for the U.S., specifically to end human bondage. We got soldiers from Franklin County. Now, people are telling you, my grandfather didn't fight for slavery. You go, let me read one of his letters. It doesn't happen.
Or he risked.
Or they're not going to show you.
He would have risked everything not fighting for the Confederacy.
But what kind of letters are available? What kind of writing is available from the Confederate standpoint? And when
let's lift let's lift that history up.
It gets contentious
because history
gets specific.
cannot be cancelled. That's what I'm saying. History cannot be cancelled.
This is what we're asking, and it's scary.
Well, yes, it is. But now we go down the road of if we move the memorial, or even get rid of it completely. I disagree with that. I think there was American lives lost, whether they were Confederate or Union or not. They were Americans. All right, and that's an Englishman speaking.
And they are honored right here at the memorial.
And they are. And what was the Jubilee Daughters of the Confederacy sponsored this monument
at the courthouse.
Okay, so let's get beyond that. The British were the first people to denounce slavery and abolish it.
Yeah.
Okay, they lost in excess of 2,000 Royal Navy sailors enforcing that abolition. So let's not let's think
Where's
about that
monument
too.
On U.S.
There is no monument
Not
on
only
U.S.
that, but
soil.
when they came back, they enlisted British Marines, black Marines, who then went in and burnt down the White House.
Yeah, 1814.
Yeah.
I mean, I can rejoice in that a little bit, but
we don't have a monument for that either. What is the difference between the
Well,
Confederacy
never
and
mind.
Antifa?
I'm going to hold my tongue.
So I'm going to throw
that to
something
modern
contentious
day.
in now. What's the difference between the Confederacy and Antifa?
Oh, dear Lord. No, I've got no comparison with that because I have a huge issue with Antifa. I believe they are sponsored by external money.
Confederacy?
Well, here's my thing on the Confederacy. And you all gentlemen know me, you know, Darnell, I've met you a few times, Brian, we go way back. I mean, I would hope y'all consider me a decent enough individual. You know, I think the same of you. I'll respect the hell out of you all. I allow you into my house. I just don't do that for anybody. But me and a lot of my friends out there, we also signed up for the military thinking we were going to fight terrorism. We were going to protect America's borders from these boogeymen over here in the Middle East that I came to find out were just some of the most genuine people on the planet. People in Vietnam thought they were going to fight communism. You know, people in World War II thought they were going to fight Imperial Japan and the Nazis, when in reality, we were going and fighting banker wars. We were going and fighting for the 1%. I find it hard to believe when you go back to the Civil War either. There were a lot of people who were doing it because, hey, Virginia's under attack. I want to fight for Virginia. There was a lot of poor people in those wars that had no stake in the game. And that's for both sides of it. Grant still had slaves after the war started. He transferred them over to his wife. There's a lot of diluted history in there. We all know that the victors also write the history. So I want people out there to understand that it's not as black and white as everybody makes it out to be. It's not just because, well, hey, because I picked up a gun for the South, I was going to fight to keep people enslaved, or because I picked up a gun for the North. In fact, in the North, people were conscripted and forced to fight. Same with here in the South, over reasons they didn't understand. And I think when we can start understanding the humanity of that, we can once again start looking up and see what the real problem was. It's the people that are sending us to war, not the people fighting it. So as far as the statue is concerned, if you want to honor people that fought, you know what? As a rebel force, America was once a rebel force, and soon again we're going to probably see another rebel force. If that's your mark, and it was because of government overreach, I don't have a problem with you. If you want to set up a monument, I don't care about monuments to men. On the other hand of it, just pay attention to the fact that people are human, and not everybody is doing something just because that's the idea or perspective it's been put into your head, and that wasn't the case. So I just want everybody to humanize it. Both sides of the war, a lot of people were lost, and a lot of people weren't fighting for the same reasons. A lot of people didn't understand the same reasons. And the problem was these government officials who were all tied into essential lobbyists who owned the big plantations, who owned all the corporations back then like they do today. It's the same people pulling the strings. It's the same people causing the divisiveness, and it's the same people sending our strongest and our youngest. I mean, how many black people, how many black young men were sent to fight in Vietnam for a country that wouldn't even allow them to go dine into restaurants? Yeah. Now, how ridiculous is that? Now, that's not a white and black problem. That's a government problem right there. You know what I mean? That's people signing papers saying, well, you can go to war or you can go to jail. And a lot of people did, you know, but we got a lot of heroes out of that, and it started giving us more perspective. We got people like Muhammad Ali who would sit down, and, you know, we've got a lot of other people. Hey, if you did anything to get out of going to that war, I don't fault you at all. Why would you want to? Why would you want to go die for a country? And that goes for the white people who died over there too, and the Asian Americans and the Mexican Americans, or whoever the hell has died wearing a uniform in this country. You deserve honor and respect, but you're not necessarily doing it because it's what you believe in. A lot of the times it's because you've been fooled, you've been tricked, you've been lied to, or you've been forced to. And once again, it brings us all back to the divisive. If we start blaming each other for why the problems are being caused above our heads.
What if we are
there's
some
a
of our own
bomb.
problems? And I think especially from the black perspective, this seems the scariest part for the white community is someone can be racist and not a bad person. Someone can engage in sexism and not be a bad person. Like, there are things that I have done.
God, yeah.
And I think that's where it seems like we get into contentious things. Someone could absolutely have joined the Confederacy to kill abolitionists and been a wonderful father and raised a kid who didn't hate other people, you know, who could have been a good businessman. Is that moment, it was not the full of their existence. But right now we're starting to force those generations to be the full of their existence. The people I know in Franklin County, however racist great-great-grandpa must have been, there also had to be some good. Because most of the people I know in Franklin County, whatever got down to that generation now that I'm dealing with, they're good people.
Well, yeah, it's because I don't think racism is is something inherent in human beings. I think love and compassion is inherent in human beings.
It should be.
I think that mass media, that people in control is the biggest issue we face. And you're told that this is how it is, and you're told that black people are animals and they're not human and they're only 1/3 human. When you're told this for generation after generation, it's just like anything else. You're going to believe it because it's what you're supposed to believe. A lot of these people aren't inherently bad, and a lot of these people have found a way to get out of their own damn way and start seeing, you know what, these visions, you know, these are wrong, and it takes time. And I think as young as a country we are, to have the timeline we've had, we've come an awful long way. But I think at this point in time, we've got too many chiefs and not enough Indians. We got too many people making decisions that don't really represent their constituents. We got too many people making decisions for their own personal gain and their own personal good. And we find ourselves still to this day as just regular Americans and regular people or regular humans on the battlefields. And that battlefield might be here, it might be across the pond, it might be in our own minds, but wherever it is, pull yourself away. You know, 100 years ago, it was the newspaper. 50 years ago, it was the TV. Today, it's the internet. Pull yourself away once in a blue moon, walk outside, and talk to your damn neighbors. It doesn't matter who it is. If your neighbor's a good person, talk to him. If you take care of your neighbor and he takes care of his neighbor, we all take care of each other. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, straight, gay. I've said this hundreds and hundreds of times. If you're a good person, you come into my house, you sit down, we'll have dinner, we'll talk.
Welcome.
You're welcome. If I find out you're a creep, I will throw a white man in a wood chipper just as fast as I will anybody else if they deserve it.
Now,
I got no time for
Is that toes
evil
first
people.
or head first?
It's toes first because they're going to feel it. Because the wood chipper is reserved for special people.
Very special.
Now,
Very special people.
I think on our end of the activism, we needed to go one step further. There are people right now who are going, the problem with this country is progressives. How do we get them
I'm actually one of those guys.
how do I
because
get you to come meet me and go, like,
Well,
somehow it worked with us.
Well,
Like,
can we-
you're like,
well,
oh,
yeah, no,
whatever
listen.
your brand of progressivism is,
we can.
you don't hate me.
We can. No, absolutely
Right.
not. We can sit at the table, have a damn good conversation.
I've got to get everybody to seek out
because we don't look
those
at
folks
you
we're afraid of.
because there is a gap in communication here because you all call yourselves progressives,
Yes.
but we don't look at you as progressives. We don't, you know, we look at people in urban areas who are pushing for the most absolute. So you're calling yourself something and you're tied to a bigger ideology that's across the country that we're seeing out here on social media and all these things. And it's difficult to tie it together. So we don't look at you as progressives. So
Well, the rawest form of progressive, to me, is an association with Marxism, whether you like that or not, and that's actually a problem with the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
because the Democratic Party has been taken over by the progressives.
And
Now,
even Marxism.
you see, it's been very clever how they've done that, because that term progressive makes you think you're moving forward. It makes you feel good, right?
That's the plan.
Well, that's the plan. That's what it looks like, but it is a wolf in sheep's clothing, because I don't want anyone to be fooled. I'm a firm believer that progressivism is Marxism.
Okay.
I have no idea what Marxism is.
Well, Marxism is, we'll go back to my school friends, Marxism in its rawest form, I can cover it in a hyphenated word, is anti-capitalism. That's what Marxism is. Okay, we'll call it anti-capitalism.
Workers have the control.
There's a lot to Marxism.
Yeah.
Okay?
I think that's where it gets complicated.
And I would urge everyone to look into the policies, the ideology, the isms of Marxism. All right, I would challenge everyone. Look at it and say, is that a Democrat? And I'd say, hell no, because a Democrat is someone that I can sit round the table with and have a conversation, have a compromise. But if you're one of these progressives, I would say step back from that narrative, because it paints you as a Marxist. This country does not need to be socialist or Marxist. And I'm not saying capitalism is the cure-all either.
No, capitalism is a cure-all. What's not is crony capitalism, and that's when the corporations have hold of everything. If I want to go to you gentlemen and say, hey, you all have a cow I'd like to buy, here's $1,000 for the cow and all the feed and all the time and effort you put into it, you make a few $100, and I get the cow and you get the money. That's capitalism. When you add in the cronyism, you get the corporations that are inflating the market, they're rising prices, they're dropping prices, they're controlling production, and they're doing it through the use of government power. So they have no incentive to help us out. That's why they want to crush small businesses. That's why they want Amazon.
Slice of the pie.
That's why Kroger and Walmart and Lowe's were open during the pandemic, but local restaurants and local businesses weren't. That's crony capitalism. Capitalism in its purest form is the answer. Because it's just as simple as we make a decision to barter amongst one another. We make a decision to barter amongst this person. We can do it. We don't need the government in the middle of it.
Capitalism isn't perfect, but I would charge you, because you've made your stand, right?
Yeah.
I mean, both of you made your stand and said, "Listen, I'm a BLM activist. I'm progressive." I would challenge you to say, you know what? Rather than use the word progressive, take back what a Democrat is, and you will get a lot further by calling yourself a Democrat than a progressive.
I think I am a progressive Democrat. I think
can't be one. That's not saying. Now, hang about. Let me give you one example here. You can be fat and you can be lazy. You cannot be both. That applies to a democratic progressive. You can be one.
They seem like they help each other.
No. The problem is that
feels like it comes from laziness.
Well, no, that's the misconception. To me, a true Democrat is someone that I can compromise with. We can barter around the table. A progressive,
Old Mr. Mustache was a progressive. If you want to get down to historicals, he was a progressive.
Well, I was going to come on to that, because progressivism, here come these bloody isms. Progressivism is nothing more than being a fascist. And everyone swings out, you can't call a left-wing guy a progressive. I tell you what, yes, I bloody can. Because the description of a progressive or a fascist is not exclusive to being left-wing or right-wing. It's both. You can be a left wing and a right wing and a socialist fascist. And that's just a different concept that people can't grasp. Fascism is not exclusive to the right. Let me tell you that right now.
Well, even stepping back to Marxism, because I know amongst African Americans, Marxism has a whole different feel. The idea of Marxism is the idea for most African Americans, what's been built through is the idea that physical labor is equal to capital labor. So my hour of work is just as valuable as your truck.
That's collectivism.
And so if I can, and I think that's where the beginning of the thing is. And the second piece is Karl Marx wrote a letter to Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War saying that removing slavery is going to emancipate the labor of your white countrymen. This is a move forward. So amongst African Americans, Marxism has not always been seen as negative. Before we understood the concept of Marxism, Martin Luther King was called a Marxist consistently. So one of the things we know is when that term is thrown out, it's often used as a way to create a cohesive misdirection.
Absolutely. And
once we get into it, Marxism is almost impossible to actually do now.
It's by definition, it's so complex.
Yeah.
If anyone swings around and says to me, can you tell me what a Marxist is? No, I probably can't.
Most of the people throwing that term out can't.
Well, that's because the definition of Marxism is actually quite complex. But to describe it as anti-capitalist and collectionism is probably too good descriptives of Marxism. For this country, it is definitely something that we do not welcome.
The fascism scares me more than Marxism will.
Well, the problem is with progressives, the progressives have become the current day fascists.
But
think about that.
The weapons we're wielding don't seem that they can create. If I say
the weapon of free speech,
right? What I'm going to do
weapon of free media,
is I'm going to record you speaking. That's my weapon now. How does that make me a fascist?
It's not being able to compromise with an opposing opinion is really what fascism is about. You're having it my way or it's the highway.
Right.
I am.
Yes.